Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good morning, Team Krulak community, and welcome back to a special episode of the Brewcast, our series connecting the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. As always, before we begin, all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, the United States Marine Corps, the U.S. government, the Swedish government, or any other entity with which our guests might be affiliated. So bringing you a special episode today, and it's one of our, we were sort of talking before we hit record, feel like we've sort of had a mini series of episodes now with guests from the Swedish Defense University who we've had in a number of different contexts, and as part of a growing partnership between Marine Corps University and Swedish Defense University, we've been lucky enough to have a number of visitors come over from the Swedish Defense University to share ideas, practices, show them what we're up to, learn more about what they're up to, and collectively make ourselves better and more prepared for operations potentially up in that environment or other future partnerships. So in that line, we have another guest here today to talk, who's visiting us from Swedish Defense University. I have Lieutenant Colonel Jan Eldeblad, who is currentently responsible for strategic and joint wargaming exercises for civil defense, crisis preparedness, and military defense. He's been wearing the uniform since 1984 and has a tactical background in infantry and mechanized operations. He's been a battalion commander and assistant chief of staff G5 at brigade and division headquarters. And as he stated, he sort of worked up from operational to strategic concerns. So he's had position as head of operation in Korea for the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. He has been head of operations for the Nordic Battle Group, and he's also been operational representative for Swedish Defense University's Partnership for Peace Consortium. He has been head of the Department for Military Senior Advanced Courses at Swedish Defense University and was involved in several large exercises. He was assigned to develop strategic simulation at Swedish Defense University, including a U.S. cooperations for the Center of Advanced Strategic Learning. And prior to his current billet, he was director for executive education at the Center for Societal Security at Swedish Defense University, where he developed and managed national and international programs looking at topics like strategic leaders and decision makers, crisis management, total defense, security, societal law, international strategic programs, and strategic communications. And so we'll get into what brought him over here. But obviously, we appreciate you taking some time to tell us more about what your focus on professional training and education for Swedish military is, and some of the things we can learn from you and collectively share with each other. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And I guess first off, so what brought you over here to Marine Corps University?
Well, firstly, thanks for being invited here. And as you have heard through the presentation, I'm from Sweden. That means that I'm not a native speaker. That means that normally I'm using a lot more words to explain things. So have patience with me when we have this conversation here. But it says, as you stated as well, that the cooperation between the United States and Sweden, and especially this place and our university, has been increasing during the last years, and that's the reason for me to be here as well. So what I have been discussing is serious discussions about how to conduct wargaming, especially on the joint level, and we have touched up on things that I am on my concerns at the moment, how to train and how to work with my students and key actors. That's on the strategic level. And I would say especially when they are meeting each other, because I think it's not easy to say is digital borders between strategic and operational level. I think those are seamless and the same as from operational to tactical level. But I think that will be something that we'll discuss. And we discussed a lot as well during these days about the requests of using wargaming and wargaming look-alike methods have been increasing during the last years. And I think it's quite logical because things are happening around us. And especially, I would say, in Sweden, we have a very tense situation, and we really need to increase our capacity. And that means that we need to use more efficient methods. And that perspective, I think wargaming is excellent to train commanders, headquarters, and troops.
Yeah. So from we were talking about before we recorded, we at Marine Corps University in the Krulak Center, we've had some opportunity to get a look at what Swedish Defense University and the Swedish military are already doing in terms of wargaming. So could you maybe expand on how are you already applying it in some of your training educational programs?
So we have a lot of ongoing wargaming, especially for more junior, I can't say junior students, but the rank of captain and majors, more or less, that we are using more computer-based wargaming. And that's something that we have developed on our own. And I know that it's an ongoing cooperation with you guys on this one. And I think that is something that is really, really good to share. If someone have been developing one thing, that's good just to share it with others so we can help out, because it takes time. And now I have seen in here at the Krulak Center that you have been developing amazing operational wargaming. And it takes a lot of time. And in that terms, I think it's very, very good that you are sharing as well. So I see that we have an increasing requests when we are educating our students in using wargaming. And it's all over, I would say, all these ranks and all these courses. And again, as I told you before, that maybe the requests and the main concerns, I would say, is to find the real good methods when you're using wargaming for actors on the strategic level and operational level.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning as well that I'm working with civil actors as well, and that's our societal, security. And it's one thing that we are training our officers and commanders in different levels, and more or less we have the same language. We understand. We have more or less the same planning culture. We have procedures. We have many, many things. But when it comes for civilian actors, civilian commanders, they don't have the same planning culture. They don't understand our language. So when we are meeting at the battlefield, and we need to meet, because all our system in Sweden and in Finland, and I was mainly in all the Scandinavian countries, is that we really need to combine the civil defense and the military defense. So and now, because of the situation is so tense around us, we need to increase that part. So that is what I'm struggling with, and how we're using the wargaming as a method.
Yeah. So interesting. You describe that, having the civil, civil personnel there around the table with, the military decision makers. Like that's a similar challenge.
Yeah.
In a lot of what, I say we hear, in Marine Corps education, but also across our different services and, for joint operations is, getting all of those non-military actors at the table, because especially at that strategic level, they're going to be there. But like the first time you're going to deal with a crisis is probably not the first time you want to have those people around the table. So in the work that you've been doing to sort of increase that integration, what are some of the ways that you feel like you've successfully done that, to bringing those two different parties to the table and trying to get them to sort of speak the same language?
I would say that's one key for success, but I think it's always when we discuss about exercises in wargaming, and that is to create, I would say, conditions that makes people comfortable around the table. Because, brought into a wargaming table and you don't know about the actors around you, and then you're supposed to just take decisions. I think it's very uncomfortable. So create those conditions that make all the actors comfortable, and then you run out the wargaming. And I think due to this environment that we all are sharing, both civilian and military, and I would say between all these countries as well, that the problem framing the first part in the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
That's equal. It's very, very complex. It's a lot of things ongoing, and it's all about you as a commander and your staff to understand what is going on and to frame the problem and to describe it and to communicate it. And that's what I'm focusing a lot at the moment, just to train repeatedly with civil and military commanders to develop their own skills in problem framing and to communicate how you understand the dilemmas or the problem that you have been framing. And I'm normally saying that because our organizations, and I would say especially the military, but I would say it's more or less equal if you go for police forces, other teams that are very, very loyal. So that means that if our commanders, both civil and military, are bad in framing the problem and are bad in communicating the problem, our loyal organizations will work anyway. But they will run they could run on the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And that is not that very good. So we are dependent on that the commanders are really framing the problem and are able to communicate it.
Yeah. Do you have an example that springs to mind, maybe, of one of those exercises where you felt like you were able to successfully get that integration and run a valuable exercise following?
Yeah, I would say that we are using these exercises more or less every time because of my job before. But we have a culture as well in Sweden that we need to train together. So those activities, they are very, very, very common, I would say. So I'm just facing, just in a couple of weeks, that we have gathered all these key actors in the civil defense and some of the key actors in the military defense, and then work together.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a network thing as well, of course. If you don't meet, you don't know, you will not share things as well. And I think that was one of the keys for success during our system during the Cold War, that people were pushed together and they need to meet and they get to know each other, and then they started to share things. And then you're working as a team. But normally I say that I don't need to develop so much of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Because the situation that we have around us, it's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm just putting in some development in some area, and that's more or less enough. And then when you put together a scenario, more or less explaining what we are facing right here and right now, people are gonna get, oh shit, this was very, very terrible, but it is as we are here. So and in some way, I think it's good just to summarize what is going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
But then I could just use some development. It could be whatever, cyber threats. It could be refugees. It could be terror things. It could be whatever. And then you just start, and then you just continue, and then you pull in more things step by step. Because I think as well that the culture from a civil actor is that you're not used of taking so much decisions that we are in the military.
Mm-hmm.
They are more used of, especially I would say in Sweden, of the corporates.
Mm-hmm.
That means that when you have corporates between, then you have more or less approved decision on what we should together do. But I think in these terms, when things are happening so fast and it's so complicated, we need to increase their skills and take decisions. And that's a little bit new, I will say, for our society.
Yeah. No, again, interesting as you describe that, because I'm thinking of there's an element in the Marine Corps specifically that focuses on civil military operations and that working together. Yeah. Because that same dynamic exists here, right? Like in the Marine Corps and the military, like, I want you to do this, you go do it, right? You might have a discussion to make sure it's the right plan, but like when you're told to go do it, there's no question that you should. Whereas, civil support to military operations, or if the civil side is the lead and the military is in support, that's much more about consensus and discussion and agreement. Yeah. And you can't order a civilian in the same way you can order a military person.
but I think there are lessons learned as well from our, I would say, our as a military guy, that we sometimes could learn as well from the civilians, because we have a little bit too much command centric culture. That means when you have a very complex situation, it is a risk as well that you are just letting the commander think and frame the problem. And sometimes it's not easy for the commander to understand all things that are embedded within this, the situation. And I think in that terms, there are methods that trying to and to work with. I know that the Kahneman theory is that it's sometimes better to use that everyone is thinking about the problem, and then you share around the table, and then everyone will be able to speak.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there are embedded and sometimes during the framing, because of the ranks, because of the time, because of someone is using the body language or the voice or whatever, and that means that everyone is not maybe comfortable to share their thoughts within the problem framing. So in that terms, I think we have as well something to learn from the civilian way
Mhm.
of working. But at least when we are working together, because otherwise we will not let them in the discussion, because the military high-ranking officer will just tell, this is the problem, this is the dilemma, this is what we are going to do. And then everyone, okay.
Yeah. And again, like that's a habit pattern in some places
Yeah.
here that we want to try and kick that habit, but not always
Yeah.
successful at it.
Yeah, but sometimes you need, of course, to change because of the tempo. It's necessary to take decisions, and in that terms, so that's the way of, I would say, understanding the tempo within the decision making, and that's something that you need to develop your own skills as well.
Yeah. So actually, if you could maybe expand on that a little bit, because in some of our pre-discussion notes here, you said one of the things you're trying to help students better understand is that time perspective.
Yeah.
You have time, space, and forces, but time is one thing that's it's not something you can manage it, but you can't necessarily control it.
Yeah.
So what do you do to help students or the groups you bring together for these exercises better understand and appreciate it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very good question. And I think maybe it occurs more definitely when it comes for the strategic level, and maybe sometimes on the joint level as well, that you more explain on what you would like to do. And you're using a lot of words within your plans and other documents explaining what do you want to do. But when it comes for how to do it, that's the seamless interaction between the tactical level and the joint level. And I would say these things are the same from the strategic to the operational level. And I've seen that maybe it could be that we have not trained that much as strategic leaders, strategic decision making when it meeting the joint level, that we are not good in explaining what we would like to achieve. So when I'm running the wargaming, is okay, people are coming for the table, and then I'm asking for the action, and they are saying, okay, I would like to achieve this. Okay, but how? And it's just quiet. They can't explain about how. And when we're running the wargaming, you could actually see about the time is so crucial when you're asked for explaining how, because then you need to explain how we'll use the resources in order to achieve the objectives. And when you're elaborating with the other actors, there will always be discussions about how to do it. And then it's a lot of I would say, it's a lot easier than to come a little bit deeper within the how questions. And then you understand more about time. And I think that's something that wargaming could help people to understand the time perspective. And I have seen the same way if you're just discussing about how you address things and how you as a facilitator in the wargaming is asking about the how things. But the same I would say is that it's maybe some lack of knowledge about the capacities in the different weapon systems.
Yeah.
And that's very obvious when you're asking about the how question, because then the time will be so obvious that you don't understand the time. So the movement, the weapon system, and what you would like to achieve. So this is the same way is because we normally are asking for, okay, this is your action and this is the desired effect that you would like to achieve. But when you're digging a little bit deeper and asking about the how, and you're elaborating on showing the weapon system and the units at the separated places, then you really coordinate within the discussion time, space, and forces. Sometimes I feel that the facilitators need to develop our skills as well to make sure that the dialogue within the communication from the actors in the wargaming towards the other actors and the facilitators need to address both time, space, and forces. Otherwise, it will only be what actions is your next move, and then you explain, okay, the next actor. So I think sometimes we miss that part. These that the facilitator are really pushing the actors in order to explain how. And that is something that I think is a good tool for us as running wargaming to take that time and to really dig a little bit deeper on the how question.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I don't run the OWS stuff in the way that Colonel Barrett does, but there's a different, more tactical game that I've run a bunch. And one of the things I like to do to drive that how to better understand both your weapons and the decisions you have is putting a game clock onto the decisions thing, where if you haven't had that discussion of how and your overall objectives beforehand with your team, well, when the game clock is running, that's not the time. You should have had that discussion before. And now you're going to really see the consequences of failing to have that discussion, because you don't know, you have a vague idea of the what, but you didn't discuss the how. And time doesn't stop in the real world. So it's something we try and put on the players to understand that.
I agree. And I don't think that's maybe one of the reasons saying that it's a seamless border between the different levels, tactical, operational, and strategic level, because it's not that the operational level is interfering in the execution from the tactical level. It's to understand the battlefield's tempo about the time, space, and forces. If you're not able to understand it, you can't monitor. Then you can't be proactive in what you like to synchronize or coordinate. I think that is something that we need to work with. We need to, I would say, especially about the joint people, to really increase the knowledge about our own troops' capacities and limitations, and our allies and the enemy. And I know that we have done a huge mistake about Russia, because I think we have overestimated their capacities, and now we are seeing that they are not that good that they have been saying or that we have assessed as well.
Yeah, there are all kinds of lessons to unpack from what we thought to what we ultimately saw. So actually, kind of in that line, we want to shift gears a little bit to something else we wanted to talk about. And I know you recently visited Ukraine. You said within the last few weeks, actually. So I guess, to the extent that you're able to, based on what your own constraints and rules are, what did you go there for? What did you see? And what was your sense on I guess wherever you visited? I don't know if you were close to any of the front lines or not, but what's your sense of what's sort of potentially unfolding here in the near future?
So I spent, I was helping the Ukrainian, especially Defense University, the first time during 2012. So that was before the war, 2014. And that was bilateral cooperation that we conducted then. And mainly, I would say, to start up the joint education, because they were Soviet approached in their way of using the armed forces. And then they have done a great job, I would say, since 2014 up to now in educating their troops and their officers. And when I'm starting at the Defense University back home in Sweden, 2015, I started to increase that cooperation or catch up again, I would say. Between that, I was spending a year in Korea, so that was the reason. But then it was a cooperation helping the national defense of university in Ukraine, in Kiev, in education about their officers, and we had a lot of workshops as well about their total defense system. They were very interesting in that one, and we share best practice. And that has been since then, I would say, a very good relationship between us. And I think it was easier because we are not any NATO member, and we have a very tense situation as well, not the same as they are having. But during that time, I think it was two countries that were helping each other in sharing best practice and lessons learned. So that was more or less the journey from 2015 up to the pandemic started. That it was disrupted during the time.
Yeah.
But now we catch up again. So I was there with my commandant and some other people. So we were visiting universities in Odessa. In the southern part was quite close to what was going on in Cherson area. And then we spent some time up in Kiev as well, but we were traveling as well between Odessa and Kiev. And then we met again the National Defense of University in Kiev. And then we have, I would say, increased now the cooperation, both from education and a research perspective. So one proof of that one will be that they will send a delegation to Sweden and share lessons learned and best practice. That will take place in the near future. And we will go back and help them as well and share our experiences. So it is really to learn from them, but help them as well in just exchanging lessons learned and best practice. So that was more or less what I was doing. And it was quite interesting because more or less every officer that was working as a teacher at the university have been in combat just recently. And especially the commandant, he was just a couple of days before we arrived. He went back as an operational commander from Bakhmut area. So that was a very amazing leader, and he had a lot of things to share.
What were some of to the extent again that you're able to discuss it, any of the lessons they shared that kind of jumped out at you as important things to sort of take back and apply?
Yeah, I think many of the things that they are mentioning is that the willingness to defend, it's both for the whole society, but as well within the troops. That is one thing, and that is one thing that I think all of us could just think about. So how do we address that part to our population? How do we make them understand that maybe it could be that all these good days that we have had during many years now, maybe it could be changed. So how do you prepare yourself? So when we are educating our civilian people back home, we are asking, so how prepared are you? Let's say that you are a very important key actor in the civil defense. How prepared are you? Have you told your family? Because when things are happening, you are supposed to be here at your organization. Have you prepared your family to be comfortable? Otherwise, you can't be serious in your business as well. So that is one thing. But I think they have a lot of operational lessons learned from how do you actually do when you are saying that you're resilient, that the society is resilient. Someone have told me a good story that resistance, that is that you could take a punch from a boxer, but resilience is that you're taking the punch, you're getting down, but you raise up again. And I think, how can they raise up again and again and again? What is the driving forces behind it? So that is one thing that are really interesting in see how we could just tell that story for our population and others. But I think for the officers and for the troops is that I think we have maybe training too much with the perfect system. We always have this, it's fully manned, fully equipped. We have our shooting regulations. You can't shoot more than 3 to 4 shots every minute or so. And then you have to wait for 10 minutes because otherwise you will destroy the system and so on. And we are normally saying that, well, to train this weapon system, it demands 6 months. But they are saying that it takes only 2 days. And you can't just shoot 3 to 4 shots. So we shoot 100 instead. So these kinds of understanding about the battlefield, that how do we train our commanders to command the troops when it's not 100%? You just have 60%.
Yeah.
And you lack of vehicles, you have lack of weapon systems, and these kinds of things. And suddenly you have to cooperate, or you will have troops that it is 150% more than you had from the beginning. How the hell are you working then as a commander? These kinds of changing the conditions to educate our commanders to be more flexible, that is what they are telling about. So, and the third of say main lessons learned will be maybe that the battlefield is so many things that are coordinated without any coordination plan for it. How they're using the drones, how they're using the civilians to report by cell phones things that they are seeing, how they will use deception, these kinds of things that are really, really coordinated without maybe that is coordinated by some kinds of headquarters.
Yeah, that point has been something that we've in a separate mini series focusing on the war in Ukraine, but we've regularly talked about is among all other things, this is it's really a laboratory for a lot of technologies and how they all mesh together that we've talked about in the abstract, but now we're seeing it on a real battlefield, and they're the ones now figuring it out. Exactly like cell phones and commercial drones, right? I've read so many articles, fiction stories, stuff like that, but it just doesn't, it doesn't have the same impact when you see things like with, civilians essentially using their iPhone to share targeting information.
Yeah.
And then there's some drone that they bought off the store and 3D printed like some guidance fins for an RPG round and use that to take out a target. It's all new stuff that there's no plan. Yeah. We gotta figure it out, and they're starting to figure it out for us.
I think that's my conclusion is that the tempo itself or the opportunities will just show up. That means that we need to be more flexible, more dynamic in our approach, and we need sometimes just being able to shift the tempo as well. So it's both a challenge from the problem framing, the complexity, understanding what is going on, because it's so confusing what is going on. It's not that you will have perfect sensors telling you what is going on. It's just a mess.
Yeah.
And then from that part, how do you coordinate that could be coordinated, and what do you have to live with? You need to be comfortable just saying that you will not have 100% of control. And how are you working with your own flexibility? So in that perspective, we had a very fruitful discussion about maybe that yesterday's training was that we train the people just to follow the plan. We develop perfect plans, and we just exercise and train just to follow the plan. Even though the reality is just changing, we can't assess and we can't adapt to the delta between the plan and the reality. And having commanders that are confident and then just use this, okay, this is the situation, now I'm just changing. So I heard about some research as well, and I will dig deeper in that one as well. That's the most successful leaders. Those are the guys that are taking more decisions, and that means they are changing their decisions as well.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we really should look into.
Yeah, and I think between what Swedish Defense University is doing and what we're doing here at Marine Corps University in the Krulak Center, wargaming is a great way to not the only way, but a great way to get after examining that delta and trying to get comfortable in it and comfortable with making decisions when things aren't perfect and your network's down. And your artillery resupply didn't show up, right? Okay, well, what now?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing when we're having these exercises and all this excitement, and then looking at the computer, and then you start the exercise and you're asking for the electricity, and then you just turn off the electricity. And then it's just, okay, what now? That's a good start.
Yeah, I mean, something as simple we take for granted. Having power. I'm come from an aviation background, but I know that not for the aircraft itself so much, but for all the support that it takes to keep aircraft flying. If you turned off the electricity, everything gets massively harder without the enemy having to shoot a single round at you. Everything gets harder if you don't have power to. So,
and that is what the enemy are searching for. What is our weaknesses? Well, maybe we are too comfortable in having all our procedures that we are just following, and that is one of our weaknesses as well. That we are a little bit sometimes able to predict, and we need to work with those. It's very, very interesting to discuss that part. And I would say that's maybe one of my conclusions is that I'm not that very fond of having too serious scenarios. Because in my opinion, I could just produce 1,000 different scenarios for the commanders. The thing is that the commanders need to train to act when things are happening, to frame the problem and to decide. No matter it will be scenario 1 to 100 or whatever, because otherwise we'll just be good on that scenario.
Yeah,
and that is the thing that we maybe need to work on. I know that it costs a lot more dynamic in our education itself, but I think that should be the key for success for us.
Well, great. So I think that's a good note to end on. We've been going for I think almost close to an hour here. So time flies when you're having fun, right? Any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share from your time here, or anything you're going to be working on over at Swedish Defense University in the future?
Yeah, maybe my takeaway will be more or less connected to this dynamic approach, because I see it as both as the command and control system and for the leaders and the leadership as well to be more dynamic. But from an educational perspective, it is the same. So we can't just stick to one method. It must be a little bit seamless when you're using wargaming exercises, stop and then go for a workshop or knowledge building and then back again for the wargaming, depending on and how deep you're asking the how question, as we discussed before. That's a little bit of a challenge as us as an educators, be more dynamic. So maybe the word of dynamic will be my last words.
Yeah. Okay. Good final words. All right. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Jan Eldeblad, sir, thank you very much for taking some time this morning to sit down with us and share your insights and thoughts with our audience.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And again, this relationship with Swedish Defense University between, you and Marine Corps University, it's only going to grow. So,
yeah, absolutely.
We look forward to continuing these conversations and being able to share the insights of, folks like yourself and some of the other staff and military members over there. All right. And to our audience, thanks for joining us for this special episode of the Brewcast. And we have a number coming up in the coming weeks. Too many to list, so just make sure you're following us on all of our social media channels or via email for future episodes. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.